Good evening. I'm Lisa Wilson, the president of Independence Chamber of Commerce, and on behalf of the Chamber and Independence Community College, welcome to tonight's City Commission Candidate Forum. Would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm Dan Barwick, president of Independence Community College. On behalf of the Board of Trustees of the college, I welcome you to our campus and to the historic Inge Theater. At this time, please join me in welcoming the moderator of tonight's forum, Dan Reynolds, the Vice Chair of Public Affairs for the Chamber of Commerce and law partner at Emmert, Chubb, Reynolds, LLC.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Dan and Lisa, and again, welcome to tonight's forum. First, I'd like to go over the format for the forum so everyone understands how we will be proceeding. Prior to everyone arriving, all of the candidates drew for their seating order tonight in random order. We're going to first start with introductions. We'll start with Mr. Ususi, and we'll be going down the line. After each candidate will have 2 minutes for introductions. After that, there has been 2 pre-selected questions that I'll read each of the candidates. And we'll come back in reverse order. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to answer the pre-selected questions. After the pre-selected question rounds, each candidate will draw from the fishbowl that's in the middle of the table randomly submitted questions from the general public. They'll have 1.5 minutes to answer those questions, and they'll be answering 3 randomly drawn questions from the fishbowl. After the randomly selected question portion, each candidate will then again have 2 minutes for closing remarks. I'd like to remind everyone that the candidates were not allowed to bring any pre-made materials up on stage. However, we've provided them with pens and paper to make notes while the forum is being conducted. Also, I'd like to make everyone aware that tonight we're being videotaped, and this forum will be able to be viewed on Channel 12 very soon. So without further ado, I will let the candidates speak, as this is why everyone is here. So, Mr. Ususi.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for all attending here tonight. And I want to thank all of these gentlemen that have come forward and decided to run for a position on the Independence City Commission. We face a lot of issues here, and each one of us have ideas about how we can move forward and solve some of these issues. To give you a little background on me, my name is Louis Isusi. I've been a resident of Independence, Kansas for 45 years, more or less. I'm a graduate of Independence High School, Independence Community College, and Pitt State University. I'm married. We have 4 grown children, 11 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. I'm a recently retiree from KG&E, Westar Energy, where I served almost 37 and a half years. While employed with Westar Energy, I was what they referred to as an electric metering technician. I was responsible for approximately 22,000 electric meters in the Independence and Parsons division, and I served a 5-county area. My main responsibility was over the commercial and industrial metering, to make sure that the meters were accurate and they were billed correct, and that I would be available to help resolve any issues with billing from those customers. Okay, thank you. I am privileged to be here. I got involved with city politics about 2 years ago, a little more or less. I've been attending city commission meetings for all that time, and I'm very enthused, enthralled with the process of how the city operates, and that's why I wanted to get involved. I think I can bring something to the commission if I'm elected to serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yususi. Mr. Hayes?
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Dan. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dean Hayes. I also want to thank you for being present this evening, taking time out of your busy lives to engage with us in this conversation, to listen to what the candidates have to say. And I also want to thank the other candidates for this position. Without this type of engagement, sometimes the relevant issues don't get satisfactorily elevated. And so I'm glad that we have such a large field this evening, and I'm glad to be part of it. I moved to Independence, Kansas in 1996 to go to work for Cessna Aircraft Company, a company that had selected Independence as its new home for its single-engine aircraft manufacturing facility. It's the best company I've ever worked for, the best job I've ever had, and little did I know I was moving to the best community that I would ever have the opportunity to live in. I've lived here for 21 years. Jody and I have 6 children together, all of which have graduated from Independence High School. I have 2 grandchildren. I'm glad to be up here with this dais of candidates because I have a great love for Independence. I think the Independence has a great promise, a great opportunity for advancement, and with the right leadership, I think we can deal with the issues in front of us and make progress towards a better community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Koflish?
Thank you. I'm Leonard Koflish. I was born and raised in Independence, attended high school, community college 1 year before going to K-State. I'm an architect. I worked in Pittsburgh, Coffeyville before opening my own practice here in Independence in 1981. Through the years growing up in Independence, I experienced what Independence was, saw the activity, the growth. By living in Coffeyville and Pittsburgh, I could compare what the other communities had to what we had here. And by far, Independence outweighed the other 2 communities. And coming back, opening my practice, I was able to be part of Independence. Also, during the 35 years operating my own practice, I worked for the state of Kansas on renewable contracts for 26 years, which has given me a lot of experience working at institutions with different types of renovation, seeing materials perform and fail as we did capital improvements. And about 4 years ago, I read a book that a former instructor, Paul Harper of ICC, wrote about It Flows with Milk and Honey, and it covered the development and the growth of Independence and the visionaries that had come. Lyman Humphrey in particular, his vision when he saw Independence and the excitement that he took and shared with others. And at that time, we were having election for city commissioner again. I thought, it's time to get involved, to add to a community that I've taken so much from. In the last 4 years, I've served as a city commissioner and learned much about the town and hope to add to it.
Thank you, Mr. Koflish. Mr. Royce?
My name's Tony Royce. I was born, raised here in Independence, went to high school, graduated high school, went to ICC and graduated, went to work at Phillips Petroleum, got my 4-year degree there. 87, come to work for the city as Director of Finance City Clerk, where I served for 28 years, retired in June of 2015. I've got wife Robin, my daughter Megan, who works here at ICC, and I got 4 grandkids. I believe my 28 years experience working with commissioners and the city through all that and their finances will be a great value in the years to come if I do get elected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Royce. Mr. Johnson.
I'm not sure how I'm supposed to follow all this. Hundreds of years of residency. Moved here 6 years ago to Mercy Hospital with Sodexo Food Services. Moved here with my wife, son Tommy. We were welcomed into the Bulldog family immediately, of course. He was a football player. Came to the college 5 years ago now. Love the company I'm working for now, Great Western Dining. Love the college that I'm at. Been here quite a while now. What qualifies me to run for commission? I'm a resident here. I'm an employer here. I care about this town. When we made the decision to move here, in fact, for my whole life, I told myself, if you can make a living in a small town, why not do it? I grew up in Texas, born in San Antonio, raised in Houston, spent a lot of years in Dallas-Fort Worth, kind of in the middle of 6 million people my entire life. And I had a chance to move here. Took a little bit of convincing my wife and a lot of convincing for my son, moving here in 10th grade. But as soon as we hit this town, it's great. I love it. Niwala. I spent 2 weeks here during Niwala before we moved here. And I'm not sure who told me, but somebody said you're going to see the best and the worst of Independence in a 4-day period. And I'll have to agree with that. But no. And one thing I want to stress with everybody in this room, tell your friends, we have to get out and vote. If they're not registered, get them registered to vote. You can register up until October 17th. Absentee balloting starts the 18th, which it shuts off I believe the 6th at noon before the election. Get out and vote. If you want to affect change, you got to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. So we've now gone through introductions. We're going to move to the portion where we have 2 pre-selected questions. I'd like to remind the candidates that they'll have a minute and a half to answer the pre-selected questions. There'll be 2. I'll start with Mr. Johnson and work my way back this way. I'll read the question to each of the candidates before the time will be starting. So, Mr. Johnson, what do you see as the most urgent need facing the city that you would immediately focus upon after taking office?
Number 1, infrastructure. Lots of parts of that, though. I think probably the number 1 issue that's got to be fixed is the water treatment plant. If everybody remembers, chaos broke out last Thanksgiving, and we really didn't, and we had water, really, but it got a little chaotic, as a lot of y'all know. That has got to be fixed. Before we spend any money on anything, I think the processes that allowed that water treatment plant to get to the way it is now, and it's my understanding, if there's parts break on that water treatment plant, some of them, there's no replacements. We're without water. It's not a good place to be. But those processes that led to this point needs to be fixed before we start writing checks. Streets, cleaning up the town, empty lots, abandoned buildings. We have to hold owners of these properties responsible. They need to clean this town up. If we show an effort that we're getting this town, the infrastructure together, just like a foundation of a home, the foundation's got to be solid. If we can prove to the companies that are looking at this area that we're at least making strides, it's not going to be fixed overnight. We're making strides towards that. I think we can revitalize the businesses coming into this town.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Royce, what do you see as the most urgent need facing the city that you would immediately focus upon after taking office?
Well, I would agree with Mr. Johnson. The water plant needs to be taken care of. If you don't have a water plant, you're not going to have no town, no city, no businesses. There's been repairs that's been neglected over the years. I won't go into why it was. It just wasn't done. But we're down to the point where if something breaks, we may not get it fixed for a while. And I don't think it's just one part. I think it's basically the whole plant. So that definitely needs to look. I think the commission has hired an engineer or engineering firm. They're looking at that to get some repairs started. Got a loan in the process to pay for it, so it's off to a good start, but there's probably more that needs to be done. The other thing I think needs to really be looked at is the way we spend our tax dollars. You've seen over the last several years just spend with no thought to it at all. It just looks good at the time. So I think we need to really look at that and see where our money's coming from and really make sure we can afford it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Royce. Mr. Kaflish, what do you see as the most urgent need facing the city that you would immediately focus upon after taking office?
The infrastructure is critical for us to operate, and there's a lot of different areas that comprise of that. The water, sewer, streets are all critical not only for us living here, but also as attracting new industry. We have to provide the services to businesses for them to come and establish services here. Money is the driving force of how much we can get done. And of course, with that, I think we have to reevaluate how we're spending our tax dollars. We've had a special use sales tax for approximately 5-6 years. Looking at its use, it's not been really well defined. We're collecting money with some areas to use it, but not particularly earmarking it for projects. We need to control our tax dollars to get the most out of it. Operational expenses and utilities of our facilities, the temporary city hall. We have to reevaluate everything. So I think one of the primary goals for the new commission is to set up a maintenance plan addressing each infrastructure item: sewer, wastewater distribution, streets and roads. And also in our ordinance, it provides for an economic development board. We need to establish economic development board to attract new businesses.
Thank you, Mr. Kaflish. Mr. Hayes, what do you see as the most urgent need facing the city that you would immediately focus upon after taking office?
Infrastructure. But infrastructure is expensive. You can't fix everything at once. You have to be balanced. You have to understand what the costs are, and you have to understand where the money is going to come from to pay for that infrastructure. We know that any capital asset has a useful life, and we know how old the capital investments are. We know how old the water lines are. We know how old the sewer lines are, and we can certainly recognize that streets, that when they are in disrepair. All of this is important to us, and all of it needs to function, and we expect it to function well. But what we need to be able to do is put a comprehensive plan together that says how much of it can be done in any given budget year, how much of it will be done in the current budget year, and how much that is going to cost each of you as citizens. Infrastructure is important to us. It's also an important budgetary item, and we need to balance our efforts towards making the right choices with that money. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Ususi, what do you see as the most urgent need facing the city that you would immediately focus upon after taking office?
Well, in the 2 years that I've been attending city commission meetings, it's evident that we're not spending enough on infrastructure. When we have limited resources, it's so critical that we make good use of taxpayer money. We need to spend it in a responsible way. We need to take savings where we can get savings and then apply that to infrastructure needs, whether that be streets, building maintenance, the water plant. I'm glad to see that after 2 or 3 years of debating how critical the status of the plant was, that we're actually moving forward and addressing that issue, because water is critical. But in walking the neighborhoods and meeting people over the last year, I've probably talked to somewhere around 900,000 people, and they're concerned about the needs, how we're going to pay for it, and they would really like to have some job development come into the community. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for finding ways to be able to afford to stay here, to pay the expenses, and to meet the infrastructure needs that the city so badly needs. So that would be what I would focus on.
Thank you, Mr. Ususi. And again, I'm going to start with you, Mr. Ususi, and work my way with my second question. So, Mr. Ususi, what is your short and long-term vision for Independence?
My short-term vision would be to move forward on some issues that we are facing now. I was a part of a steering committee that looked at the temporary City Hall Building D and the 1916 City Hall, and we were considering a facility for the fire, EMS, and police station. Right now, the recommendations have been made to the city commissioners and the city staff, and we're waiting to see what direction they choose to go in. But those are issues that we need to address and move forward on. We're at a point where we can no longer do nothing. Nothing is what's gotten us to this point now. Long-term plan would be a comprehensive long-term plan to look at everything, look at all the needs that the city has, whether it's water lines, sewer lines, wastewater improvement, a long-term building maintenance plan to where we're not allowing buildings to get into a deteriorated state like they have now, and how we finance it. But we need to plan out for a long-term process, and then we need to stick to that process. It doesn't do any good to long-term plan, and then you deviate from that, and you don't use the resources as to what they were intended for.
Thank you, Mr. Ususi. Mr. Hayes, what is your short and long-term vision for Independence?
Well, I think that Independence is a city that has issues, but it also has a lot of good things about it. Certainly, we don't want to at all sacrifice any of the good investments we've made. We want to continue to maintain our park system. We want to continue to maintain the quality of life investments that we've made, so that those jewels of our community continue to shine. Long term, we have to focus on, I think, planning, much like Lewis mentioned, comprehensive in nature, that covers the entire list of capital needs, capital investment needs for the community, prioritizing those lists in a way that the community has feedback on them, so that we know what and where to focus, and deal with the issue of deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance has brought us to a point of crisis in certain areas, and we need to deal with that and make sure that the comprehensive plan, as we go forward, keeps us out of those types of crises, and that we act proactively. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Kaflish, what is your short and long-term vision for Independence?
Well, I think as we're dealing with the evidence of the water treatment plant, the delayed maintenance, we can pretty much see that throughout. And to continue on, we do have to develop quickly a plan of how to address all the short-term needs to maintain what we have before we look at adding to our systems. We need to look at moving to the recommendation with the City Hall group to get into a more economical facility. Also then looking for long-term, we've been able to address our health care with the Labette Health ER. That's giving us some future to pull on for future growth. It's a state-of-the-art in rural health care. I think it's something we can use to draw businesses here. In that region, we're looking at Peter Pan Road development. Peter Pan abuts our industrial park. We've got the opportunity to extend Peter Pan to provide better access to our industrial park and also improve access from the industrial park to Highway 75. So long term, I think we're going to have to look at jobs. With the health care we've got a tool to go out and reach. With the improvements on Peter Pan Road, we're providing access to an area to increase industry growth for Independence.
Thank you, Mr. Kaflish. Mr. Royce, what is your short and long-term vision for Independence?
Short term would be, I'd like to see us, we've made a good start on our water treatment plant, covering some of the basic parts that I think needs to be repaired. I'd hope we'd continue on with that until that plant is up to where it should be, and then develop a maintenance plan to take care of it so it doesn't get back in that condition again. Number 2 would be the City Hall. The committee made a recommendation to the commission and the public that City Hall should stay at the 1916 building. That was brought up several times during that 3-month period that the committee met on. Whether we do a new public safety building or move EMS out to the building out the hospital could still be explored, maybe save some money. Long-term wise, the city adopts a budget every year, which is probably one of the most important documents it budget. It lays out the plan for the city for the next 18 months. I would like to see that get started at a lot earlier time in the year instead of just thrown on the commission in June or July like it has been done the last several years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Royce. Mr. Johnson, what is your short and long-term vision for Independence?
Short term, guess what? Water. A decision needs to be made quickly. A lot of times these decisions, particularly with the big check to write, just want to keep getting put off. I think that's possibly what's been going on for the last number of years. Another short-term goal would be to develop this long-term goal. But I think before that happens, the town needs to buy into all this. We need to get everybody pulling in the same way. There is don't know if I'm seeing it. It's a little bit, we're just a microcosm of the whole country. Little mistrust is what's going on with the government. We have to be open with y'all. We have to take your input. Town meetings. I know that a lot of things go on during the bi-weekly commission meetings. Those aren't really the place a lot of times to debate things. But we need to make ourselves available to y'all, and y'all need to help us with this plan. It's y'all's town. We're here to try to just, I guess, help run it. And long-term goal, once we get infrastructure fixed, make sure plans are in order for the upkeep of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And that draws to a conclusion our pre-selected question rounds and moves us to our mystery round with the fishbowl in the middle of the table. For these questions, each candidate will have 3 questions randomly drawn from the fishbowl. Those questions have been submitted via email to the Chamber of Commerce, and we have included those in the fishbowl. Each candidate will have a minute and a half to answer the question once I read it to you. So we'll see if this works. I'll be moving around all over the stage. I'll start with Mr. Ususi and work my way down. 1 question, please. That is one. Mr. Ususi. For our community to prosper, we need a robust jobs environment. Describe what role, if any, the city should play in economic development and what the involvement should include.
All right. My answer to this would be, first of all, as a city commission and as the city itself, we should look to see, first of all, if we have any ordinances or regulations that are having a negative effect on business, that are stifling business instead of promoting business. That would be one direction to look at. we have a Chamber of Commerce, we have a Main Street, we have MAC, Montgomery County Action Council. The Chamber and MAC really need to form a good coalition to entice businesses to come into Independence, show them what's available, so we can get some economic development and jobs come to town. We need some better paying jobs so people can afford to live, work, and stay here and enjoy a lot of the amenities that this town provides. It's a concentrated effort. It needs to be from the county, the city level, to community level, to the commissioners. It's a unified effort to bring jobs here because it's going to take that to get companies to come and look at this area. And I think that's what we need to do.
Thank you, Mr. Yususi. Mr. Hayes? Tax abatements have become a standard component of economic incentive packages across the country. Do you support tax abatements to recruit industry? And if so, why?
Tax abatements are one of the things that the state of Kansas and the city of Independence have used in the past to attract businesses. They're effective. If we have the opportunity to do that, we should. 10-year tax abatement is a standard term here in Kansas. I think that's the maximum. Neighboring states have even higher tax abatement periods that are legal. And so if we're not doing it and others are, we're going to miss the boat. This is why I think that when we look at attracting businesses, we need to be aware of all the potential opportunities for us to assist them and to help them look at Independence closely. If we can get them here and have them look at our community, they'll love it. But what they may not be able to do is see how it will be economically beneficial for them unless we are also be competitive cost-wise with other communities who may be offering tax incentives, industrial revenue bonds, or other types of support of that nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Kaflish? Thank you. Do you want two questions or just one?
Okay. One at a time.
If you are elected, how will you distinguish between the needs of the population at large and the demands of the vocal special interest groups?
Could you read that again?
If you are elected, how will you distinguish between the needs of the population at large and the demands of vocal special interest groups?
I think as commissioners, our primary goal is the general population. We have to listen to the interest groups to see their concerns, but every decision we have to make has to be made upon the population as a whole. There's a conflict that can develop when we start catering to one group, but our primary concern is the development of the city as a whole. When we get detoured onto private interests, then which interest are we going to follow? We start bringing conflict within the community too, and as one of the candidates mentioned, the tension. We can't have our community divided, and the only way is for us to come together and look at every decision we make based on the community as a whole, and look what's going to be good, not in my opinion for what I need, what the area I live in town, or what somebody else, but how is it going to affect all of our members of the community, and also businesses and the commercial industry, retail. You know, we've looked at some economic development groups, some revitalization plans to try and stimulate both residential and commercial development. We've expanded the area to try and attract redevelopment in the area. So we have to look at everything as a community, not as a group.
Thank you, Mr. Kaflish. Mr. Royce? Thank you. Mr. Royce, do you have any plans to propose stronger ordinances on the care and upkeep of private property, i.e., lawn mowing standards, blowing grass into the streets, and parking on the lawns? If so, what and why, and will you enforce them?
I believe we already have those ordinances in place. The question is enforcing them. The yards get pretty high sometimes, but street department, I'm not sure how many people they have now. It takes personnel to do that stuff. I know years ago we had a public works director that enforced blowing the grass when people mow their yards out in the street and would make them do that. People did not like that, but we did enforce it for a while, but he left and so we quit doing it. The buildings and stuff is good, but I think we really need to look at the people that own the buildings can really afford some of the stuff we're making them to do. It doesn't make sense to make them redo it if they're struggling, and would put them out of business. So there's got to be some balance in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Royce. Mr. Johnson? Thank you. Mr. Johnson, a great deal has been said about transparency and openness. What does that mean to you with regard to day-to-day operations of the city, and how do you feel your leadership style fits with those ideas?
I was talking about it earlier. This is y'all's town. City Hall needs to be open to y'all's suggestions. Talked about it in my newspaper article. I don't know why we can't sit down together once a month and listen to y'all. It'll be just if it wants to become a giant gripe session, then so be it. Y'all have concerns. You want to get things done in this town. And unless we are open about things that we're doing, that trust will never be there. I don't really think it's maybe as bad as that question maybe sounds. I know it is in some respects. I mean, Leonard was talking about it. I was talking about it. Or we have to, maybe as commissioners, as leadership, we need to make sure y'all are involved, and we need to get this thing going in one direction. Everybody can't be pulling a different way. And I know there's factions in the town that want to get certain things done. Other people need other things done. We need to come together, lay those things out. If we can afford to do it, then we'll do it. If we can't, we're not going to be able to do it. We have some other things that are pressing issues, and we know that there's going to be money, lots of money is going to have to be spent, and a lot of tough decisions are going to have to be made dealing with that. And until those are made, nothing else really matters.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Question number 2, I'll start again with Mr. Ususi. Thank you. Mr. Ususi, have you read the City Hall Committee's report? Are you open to all the options that were suggested for the new City Hall, or are you set on going in a specific direction? If the latter, what is it?
Okay, I was part of that steering committee, and we looked at a lot of options concerning what we had to do with the City Hall. We had come to a consensus as a group that we felt that the 1916 City Hall should be renovated, and that there was a potential offer made to turn the temporary D building into a psychiatric mental facility. And after looking at what the potential that would bring to the community, the committee itself consensus was that was the direction that they were going to make the recommendation for the city to move forward to. And I still think that is a good recommendation. We have spent probably in the vicinity of $1.2 million at the temporary City Hall building. The utility bills for this coming year are going to end up somewhere between $285,000 and $300,000 by the end of the year. The operating expenses budgeted for 2018 are approximately $344,000. So when you take a look at that, the committee felt that the 1916 building had value. It's a structurally sound building. The problem with it is it's just never been maintained over the years, and now we're faced with dealing with that, and it's unfortunate that we are at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Yususi. Mr. Hayes. Thank you. Mr. Hayes, drive around all of southeast, southwest, and northwest central part of our city and look at housing and property maintenance and observe the many streets that need repaired or resurfaced. Look at the potholes that have been repaired. Does it look like we have an adult performing the task? What can we do to begin some pride of ownership and or occupancy? If you need that again, I can read it.
Well, if you wouldn't mind, the
Okay.
question itself.
The question really hints at
What can we do to what?
what can we do to improve the property maintenance and housing and streets in the town?
We all want a clean and crisp-looking city. We want people that visit here to see our best, and we don't want to have run-down, derelict properties and blights on the community from private property. The private property is just that, and so there are ordinances in place, minimum standards that have been established, and unless we strengthen those by enforcing them differently or change them in some way, that is what we need to be able to live with. Those of you who perhaps are private property owners who maybe are in a neighborhood where there is a possible problem property, need to elevate that so we know that you're concerned about it and so that we can act upon that concern. Streets and other city services are things that need to be maintained for safety, for access, and we need to take a look at those. If your street is ill maintained and you have problems with it, please elevate it to the city so that we know what where you are and what those streets are doing. I think that's my answer.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Kaflish. Thank you. Mr. Kaflish, there are constant claims that jobs are leaving the community and rising taxes and utilities are to blame. What do you think of the current job market in the area? Do you believe the taxes and utility rates have an impact? Why?
Well, I think the tax and utility rates do have an impact on some of our residents. We've got a wide spectrum of population based on the income low and also moderate and high. When we look at our utility rates, they're across the board. Everybody, if we raise, like we're talking, 100% on our water, everybody pays the same. So if you look at what was projected in the paper of $24 a month, that's $288 a year. If you're on a fixed income, where's the $288 going to come from? I think that's where we have to look at our rates, at how it impacts our residents, but also then when we're looking at jobs, we have to provide an economic base for them to come in, like the question with the tax abatement. The first 3 to 5 years is critical for a business getting established. So this helps a business get established to bring jobs here to the community also. So, you know, it's something that when we start looking at the amenities that we have, our park, our services that we provide, our quality of life, it's a fact that taxes pay for those. I think we're missing on not using that as a selling point to our community to show other people looking at communities what we have, that it is cost in our taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Kaflish. Mr. Royce? Thank you. Mr. Royce, what is your understanding of the role a city commissioner plays in the internal controls of the city's processes and finances?
Commissioner's role in the city is to set policy through ordinances, resolutions, the budget document I was telling you about. We have a city manager that is under contract that is to see that it's done through his department heads. If something isn't getting done like it should be, then you review the city manager's contract and revisit with the city manager and see what's going on. If he can't do the job, then we find us one, we would hire another one that would do it. It's real simple. Not a simple job for the city manager. It's a very tough job, but that is the role they take. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Royce. Mr. Johnson? Thank you. Mr. Johnson, of all the ways we can tax and spend those taxes, the most important thing Independence needs is jobs. With major industries leaving the area, what can you do to incentivize companies to come here?
Tax abatements. I think the city would be much better off as opposed to possibly attracting a company that would put 300 people to work. Attract 10 businesses here that have 30 people. Is that correct math? Yeah, 300 both ways? I started a small business with my wife in Dallas-Fort Worth area, employed anywhere from 15 to 20 people at a given time. I didn't get a tax abatement. Nobody really cared about me. Now, I know they cared with the police and fire department, wanted to come in and get a free meal, they cared. Or if my building was on fire, they did. But I think shooting big like that is a mistake. Something goes south with a place that has 300 people to work, 300 people don't have a job. Pretty good chance all those 10 or 30, 10, those 10 companies aren't all going to fail. I think if we, not to say we need to think small, but I think we're a lot better off not trying to worry about bringing, another company in with 1,500 people. Would be great, but I don't think we need to give the town away for it.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. All right, last round of questioning. Again, I'll start with Mr. Ususi. Thank you. Mr. Ususi, what do you believe are the top 3 issues Independence is facing? Of these issues, what competencies, skills, or past experience do you bring to the table that would help tackle one or all of these issues?
Okay, could I get you to read that one more time, please?
Yes. What do you believe are the top 3 issues Independence is facing? Of these issues, what competencies, skills, or past experience do you bring to the table that would help tackle one or all of these issues?
In addressing that, I have a vast experience with customer service. I've spent majority of my employment as a customer service, resolving issues, resolving problems, whether it's with an electrical billing that was too high for whatever reason. I would have to go out and explain to the customer, look at our facility, our equipment to determine if the problem was on our side or find some justification for it. When I worked in Oklahoma City, my first job, which I did like, I was a claims adjuster, and I dealt heavily with automobile accidents. I dealt heavily with people that were injured, some severely, that I had to work through the process. And they viewed me not as someone that was trying to look out for the interest of the insurance company, which I was, but I was also trying to be as fair as I could to let them know that I was there to get them to where they needed to be. And whatever time that took, I was not going to pressure them to sign or do something that they were not willing to do. And that helped me in that process. I've attended a lot of meetings. I've tried to become as thorough as far as a working knowledge with the city. And I think what I've learned over the last couple of years has puts me in a good position to where I can help make some of those decisions and move the process along. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ususi. Mr. Hayes? Thank you. Mr. Hayes, with the closing of ARCO, the hospital, Amazon, and others, everyone agrees that this is a challenging time for Independence. What specific experience do you have in helping create positive change in a large organization?
Does everyone agree with that? I'm sorry. Yes, the question says everyone agrees that these are troubling times, I believe is what it said.
That was the phrase, yes.
Independence does have its issues, but not everyone is experiencing them to the same degree. Some of you perhaps are prospering, while others, maybe your neighbors, are feeling that the pinch of a job loss or something like that. Moving a large organization along is not something that a single commissioner can do. Moving the city along is not something that a single commissioner can do. It's going to take collaboration. It's going to take collaboration across everyone in this community, across institutions, across county lines, and all the way to as far as we need to in order to make the changes that are necessary to move into the future. We have challenges, and one thing that we know is that life is going to present us with change. We in large organizations, it's very hard to be nimble, but it's something that nimbleness and agility is something that's required of us in this day and time. The changing technology, the changing knowledge base, the changing job structure, the changing world. It's going to take collaboration. My experience is to collaborate and to work across factions and across boundaries to get change made.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Kaflish? Thank you. I'll let you choose. Yeah, which one? There you go. There you go. Mr. Kaflish, what do you see as a commissioner's role with regard to day-to-day operations of the city?
The day-to-day operation of the city is the city manager's position. He's in charge of hiring and firing and terminating. So he's responsible for all the actual work of the city. The commissioner is, as Tony mentioned, role of legislative. And I think that where we come together to look at setting a direction for the city to allow the city manager to operate the city. The people are the only constant factor or element of the town. City managers' lives are 5-7 years at the most. We can't have a change of direction every 7 years and see progress in our community. So us as commissioners serving from the population can set the course for the city manager for him to operate within. So it's a teamwork between the commission and the manager. We set the course, the direction we want our town to go, give him a wide berth, but then it goes consistent from city manager to city manager, from commission to commission. And within those guidelines, he operates the daily activities. It's a teamwork and a partnership, as we've talked, establishing master plans, establishing procedures, establishing maintenance schedules for our town.
Thank you, Mr. Kaflish. Mr. Royce? Thank you. Mr. Royce, as a commissioner, what is your role in contrast with the role of the city manager? In that role, how can you best work with the city manager?
Repeat that again.
No problem. As a commissioner, what is your role in contrast with the role of the city manager? In that role, how can you best work with the city manager?
Well, the role, as I mentioned before, would be policies and working as a team, either individually or with the commission. If you have if a problem is brought to you by a citizen, you should take it to the city manager. Say, here's what we've been told, what we can do about it, and it would be his job to come up with an answer or some kind of a solving that could require some kind of maybe a work session, or depending on the problem. But you have to work side by side and as a team. The commission does.
Thank you, Mr. Royce. Mr. Johnson, last question. Thank you. Mr. Johnson, name one action taken by the commissioners this past year with which you disagree, and why. How would you have handled the situation differently and get one other commissioner to agree with you?
Gary, what would it be? I think what I've heard, and I don't know if within the last year,
Correct.
at least the sentiment amongst the town, I believe, probably moving City Hall to Mercy. I read where the mold wasn't toxic. I know there's mold. Mold can still grow to that point. It all kind of gets back to how did that building get that bad? I think in that situation, you've just got to call all hands on deck. Everybody, town, all the commissioners have to meet. All the city staff have to get together. I believe maybe a more consensus decision should have been made in that area. I think it's costing a lot of money to keep it going. I think we need to get back to City Hall. To what degree? Not sure. I don't think we're going to rebuild it into the Taj Mahal. But I think that this town needs that City Hall as a focal point.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And that concludes the randomly drawn question portion of our forum tonight. I'd like to thank everyone for submitting questions online. We had some really good questions. Thank you. So we'll conclude tonight with the concluding thoughts of each of the candidates. They'll have 2 minutes each to address the audience and the videotape. So I'll start with Mr. Ususi and work my way down. Mr. Ususi?
All right, thank you, Dan. The city faces a lot of issues, and you understand that. We have to move forward, and we will. We've faced problems before in the past, and we've come up with solutions, and this time will be no different. We'll find some direction. We'll call upon the citizens for advice and direction on how we are to proceed on some of these issues. But we've reached a point where not doing anything is just not viable anymore. You can see where not doing anything has gotten us into the situation we are now. That's why I was interested in running for a spot on the Independent City Commission. I want to help move the city forward, and I want to do it in a responsible way that's respectful to the taxpayers. Some people that are really struggling, trying to make ends meet here, whether that be solely through sales tax revenue. That will have to be discussed between the city staff, the city manager, and the commissioners. But that's the direction I think we need to go. And whoever serves, we all got our work cut out for us. And there aren't easy solutions to any of this. And some of the solutions are going to be hard to take. They're going to be hard to understand. But the time for doing nothing, that's long past. We can no longer afford to do that. It just makes it so critical that we need to keep a close eye on the revenue that we bring in, how we spend it, take savings where we can, and then apply those savings to fix infrastructure needs. But we'll get through it. We have before, and we will now with all your help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yususi. Mr. Hayes?
Thank you, Dan. Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you who have been part of my campaign so far, who have supported me in some way or another. I appreciate the opportunity to be up here. I appreciate the opportunity to serve the City of Independence. I believe in the City of Independence. I see the potential and the promise of the community. I'm ready to go to work for our great city. I'm willing to work diligently to understand the issues we will face. I'm willing to work alongside you to make the necessary changes. I believe together we're able to accomplish what needs to be done. My name is Dean Hayes, and I'm ready to work for our great city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Kaflish?
A little over 4 years ago, I sat up here seeking the office, now completing 4 years as a commissioner. We faced a lot of things in the last 4 years that I never expected. The loss of the hospital, the water problem with contamination, a lot of difficult decisions have had to be made. My farthest mind would never have had anything like that, but when I took office, I said, I've got to learn. I don't know everything. I've gone to every conference the league has had. I study the agendas, trying to know more about the information we're going to be ruling on. But the reality is, it was real easy for me to sit up here and say, I'm going to do this, when I had to do what I said I was going to do. It's been a learning experience. One of the things that I tried to do was not look at my interests, but the interests of the community, no matter what. The old adage, you got to look at yourself in the mirror every morning and be happy with what you see. That's what I decided. I have to do that. In fact, as a joke, I told Charlotte, I think I'm going to lose some friends if I have to make a wrong decision. She said, no, you won't. I said, well, yeah, I could. She said, no, you won't. And I said, well, why? She said, well, you don't have very many friends anyway. So, I tried to stay focused the last 4 years on what's best for the community. And if reelected, that's my goal too, to continue preparing for the commission meetings, researching, attending every conference I can to interact with other commissioners, other city managers, to learn more about how a city operates and look at how our city can improve and operate better.
Thank you, Mr. Kaflish. Mr. Royce?
Well, as I have said before, I've got 28 years experience with the city. I know what the commission is supposed to do, what they should do, what they shouldn't do. I know what a commissioner is supposed to do and shouldn't do, and how it works and through the whole process. I have also prepared and implemented the city's budget for the last 28 years, stayed within budget, so I know where the numbers go, where the dollars are, and how they should be spent. One last thing, I'd also like to see more people attend our commission meetings. You go to them, if they don't have an agenda on the item or maybe a concern, they're not there, and there's times there's 3 or 4 people. It'd be nice to see that room filled up if people are really interested in getting independence in a better shape and be more concerned in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Royce. And Mr. Johnson?
I think all of us are headed in the right direction. Y'all's decision needs to be made. And who do you think, 2 of us, that can actually get it done. Y'all don't really know me that well. I'm known as the food guy out at the college. I generally have a smile on my face. I think that goes a long way in life. I've found out I'm 59 years old, and if you wake up thinking it's going to be a miserable day, it's going to be a miserable day. And my day starts pretty early, getting that kitchen. If I'm late, if I'm there at 5:30 in the morning. I'll work hard. I work hard every day. I can do the same thing for y'all. I make good business decisions ever since I've been in the college. We've done very well. The college has grown. I like to think I've been a little bit of the part of that, recruiting athletes here. They come by the cafeteria. Now, it's not all. I'm held accountable every day. Every meal I put out, I'm held accountable every day. And I'll be held accountable doing this. One thing, I talked about it on my opening statement. Get your neighbors. Get them registered. If they're not registered, get them registered. Applications at the courthouse. If they're not able to vote on the 7th, get them in early. They'll take absentee voting starting the 18th. But you must get out and vote. And when you do, just remember, Indy needs Harry Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And that concludes tonight's forum. I'd like to thank each of the candidates for being here tonight. It's not easy standing up here and answering randomly drawn questions. So if we could give everyone, the candidates, a round of applause, I'd appreciate that. Thank each of you for your willingness to run for office and attempt to make a difference in our city. I appreciate that. I'd also like to take the time to thank each one of you guys for coming out and educating yourself as to the positions of each of our candidates. Thank you so much for being out here tonight and for watching on television. Remember, on November 7th to vote. That's Tuesday. Also, you'll be casting ballots for both USD 446 Board of Education and Independence Community College trustees on that date. I'm sure that the candidates would like to listen to you and field any questions after the forum is concluded. And again, have a good night. So thank you very much.